Snow had already started to fall when Rosie stumbled down the slope toward the frozen stream. Her hands were bare, sleeves soaked through, lips cracked and bleeding. She didn't cry. There wasn't anything left to cry out. Not after what she'd done. Not after what she'd run from. The wind howled through the cottonwoods, as if the world was scolding her for being alive. She crouched near the icy bank, folding into herself like some small animal hoping to disappear. Her breath came in short bursts, and her eyes kept darting back across the ridge, half expecting to see men on horses chasing her down. She'd outrun them for now, but not for long. Not with nothing on her back, but a dress torn at the hem and a story she could never tell. Rosie Bartlett hadn't always been someone who had to run. Once, she'd been a schoolteacher. Good reputation, clean boots, and away with children. But no one knew about the money. No one knew she'd been taking a little each month from the church-tithe box. Just enough to keep her sick brother in medicine. Just enough to make it through one more winter without starving. She told herself she'd pay it back, every time. But now her brother was dead, and the money was gone, and the reverend's body was cooling in the back of the chapel. She hadn't meant to push him. She just wanted him to stop talking. He'd cornered her, pressed her up against the altar, said he knew what she'd been doing. He said he'd forgive her, but only if she let him. She hadn't even known her hands could shove that hard. He fell back, hit his head on the corner of the communion rail. Blood pooled fast, real fast. Rosie ran before anyone could see. Took nothing but her coat, which she lost to a thorn bush miles back. Her legs throbbed from walking all night. Her stomach hadn't held food since yesterday morning. But it was her heart that hurt the most, tight and panicked and loud in her chest. She wasn't evil. She kept telling herself that, over and over, like a prayer. But in this part of Montana, it didn't matter why. Lawmen didn't ask questions. They didn't care if a man was about to force himself on you. If you were the reason a preacher bled out on holy ground, they'd string you up just the same. And someone would cheer while it happened. Down by the stream, she pressed her forehead to the snow. It was the cold that finally made her stop shaking. Her mind started to slow. Maybe, she thought, maybe this is enough. Maybe she could just stay there, grow still, and let the cold take the rest of her. People talked about peace at the end, about how it stops hurting. That didn't sound so bad, but something shifted behind her. A crunch, snow under a horse's hoof. Rosie's whole body went rigid. Her first thought was they found me. Her second, run. But she couldn't. She couldn't even lift her arms. The rider didn't speak at first. She heard him dismount, heard the soft jingle of a bridle being held. Then a long silence, the kind of silence that wraps around you like fog. Then a coat, warm, heavy, was dropped over her back. It smelled like pine and leather. She flinched but didn't pull away. "You're safe," a voice said, low and quiet. She turned her head just enough to see him. Young, maybe 30, maybe less. Broad shoulders. His hat shadowed most of his face, but his voice didn't carry the weight of judgment. Just weariness. Rosie swallowed hard. Her lips trembled when she tried to speak. "Don't lie to me." "I'm not." He sat beside her, slow and careful like he didn't want to scare her. He didn't ask who she was or why she looked half dead by the stream. He didn't ask why her eyes darted like a hunted deer's. He just sat, both hands resting in his lap, like someone used to waiting. "I don't want to die out here," she said after a long while. He looked at her. "Then don't." A laugh rose in her throat, bitter and sharp. "It's not that simple. Never is." They didn't speak for a few minutes after that. The wind had calmed. Just the sound of the stream creaking under thin ice and the slow breath of the stranger sitting beside her. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a flask, and held it out. "Sip. You'll feel better." She had it warily. "Not whiskey," he added. "Just coffee." She took it. Warmth slid down her throat like fire. She didn't know whether to cry or thank him, so she didn't either. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "Rosie." He nodded. "I'm Caleb." A beat passed. Then he said, "You running from something?" She looked away. "Aren't we all?" His eyes stayed on her, thoughtful, not prying. Some things catch up faster than others. Rosie held the coat tighter around her. The coffee made her feel again, and she wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Caleb stood and walked a few paces, kicking at the snow. "I don't ask questions I don't want the answers to," he said finally. "But I got a cabin 5 miles west. It's warm, quiet. You can sleep, eat, get your strength back. And then what?" He shrugged. "Up to you." She studied him. Hard to read, this man. Worn clothes, calloused hands, a small scar across his chin. He didn't seem like a man who followed the law too strictly, but he also didn't feel like someone who'd turn her in for a bounty. Still, she'd learned not to trust a kind face. Not after Reverend Hatch. Caleb saw the hesitation in her eyes. "I ain't gonna hurt you, Rosie. You don't know what I've done. I don't need to." A gust of wind kicked up, swirling snow around them. She coughed hard, chest tight. Caleb moved closer, steadying her. His touch was gentle. She hated how much it made her want to cry again. She let herself lean on him. Just a little. Just enough to remember what safety felt like. But deep down, she knew this peace wouldn't last. Nothing did. Not for people like her. Because somewhere behind her, back in town, back in that blood-stained chapel, was a secret waiting to rise. A lie wrapped in piety. A man with a bruised ego and a cracked skull. And maybe someone else who'd seen more than they let on. Someone who'd been watching. Someone who had their own reasons for staying silent. Rosie wasn't the only one with something to hide. Caleb's cabin stood alone on the edge of a frozen meadow, tucked into a fold of hills and trees so thick you couldn't see it from a trail. Smoke drifted steady from the chimney as they approached, and for a moment, Rosie wondered if someone else might be waiting inside. She couldn't shake the thought, not in a world where nothing was ever simple. But Caleb swung down from his horse and helped her off like it was the most natural thing, like he'd brought strangers home before. She watched him carefully, still clutching his coat tight around her shoulders. Inside, the place was warmer than she expected. Lived in, a worn blanket draped across the rocker by the fire, a rifle mounted near the door, a pile of books with frayed covers near the bed. There was a second plate on the shelf. 2 cups, 2 forks. Rosie didn't ask, but she noticed. Later, after she'd eaten stew so hot it stung her tongue and washed with a basin of melted snow, she sat near the fire, hands outstretched to the warmth, and asked quietly, "You live alone?" Caleb glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Now I do." That was all he said, and she didn't press. By morning, the snow had picked up again. Rosie didn't ask to leave, and Caleb didn't mention it. He handed her a thick wool shirt and a pair of mended trousers. Men's clothes, but warm and dry. They fit better than expected. She caught her reflection in a scrap of polished metal near the basin. Hair tangled, skin pale, eyes dark and heavy. But she looked human again. Around midday, someone knocked at the door. Caleb stood up so fast his chair tipped back and hit the wall. Rosie froze, heart slamming in her chest. He moved to the door, rifle in hand, then opened it without a word. A woman stepped in, wrapped in a slick oilskin coat, hair tied back, cheeks flushed from the cold. She was striking in a way that caught Rosie off guard. Not beautiful, but sharp. Strong eyes. Clean voice. "Didn't think you'd still be out here," the woman said, brushing snow off her sleeves. Caleb set the rifle aside. "Didn't think you'd come this far north. I go where the work is." She glanced over Caleb's shoulder and saw Rosie. "That her?" Rosie's throat closed. "Her name's Rosie," Caleb said evenly. "She's not trouble." "Everyone's trouble," the woman replied. "Just a matter of timing." Caleb gave a slight nod. "This is Ruth. She was a friend of my brother's." Rosie stood, unsure whether to shake hands or hide. Ruth didn't offer either, just looked her up and down like she was weighing something. Ruth stayed 2 nights. She and Caleb spoke quietly when they thought Rosie was asleep, voices hushed by the fire. Rosie listened, not because she was curious, but because she didn't trust easily. She heard Ruth mention a man named Travers, Someone looking for a woman matching Rosie's description. Said he'd come up from Helena, asking questions in the saloon, poking around church houses. Ruth said he wasn't law, but he had money and was offering more for answers. Rosie's blood turned to ice. She didn't have a doubt. It was about her. The next morning, she confronted Caleb. You told her about me. I had to. I trusted you. I didn't give her your full name. Didn't say what you did. I told her you were scared, sick, and needed to disappear. And what does she want in return? Caleb looked away. She'll keep quiet, but she's got a long memory. She might call on a favor someday. Rosie stepped back. The walls of the cabin felt closer now. So what am I now? A debt. You're a person, he said, one I chose to help. But this world doesn't run on kindness alone. She hated that he was right. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat on the floor near the hearth, thinking about Travers. Who was he really? A bounty hunter? Someone tied to Reverend Hatch? A man with his own grudge? The truth was, Rosie didn't know how far Hatch's reach extended. Some men wore holiness like a mask. She'd heard whispers before about the preacher's ties to powerful folks, about secrets traded for silence. She was about to drift off when Ruth sat beside her. I don't care what you did, Ruth said, voice low. I've seen worse, done worse. Rosie didn't respond. But I'll tell you this. If Travers finds you, he won't bring you in for justice. He'll bury you somewhere no one will think to look. Rosie turned her head. You know him? Ruth gave a slow nod. Used to run jobs for the same man. Travers plays both sides. Pretends he's after truth, but he's really after leverage. He's got a taste for controlling people, especially women. Rosie swallowed hard. Caleb doesn't say it, Ruth added, but he's worried about you. He's not good at showing it, but it's there. Rosie didn't ask how Ruth knew that. She didn't need to. 2 days later, Ruth left, taking a different trail south. She promised to send word if Travers got closer. But something in her eyes told Rosie she didn't believe they had much time. After that, the snow let up. Rosie and Caleb began to settle into a rhythm. He taught her how to split kindling, how to set traps for rabbits, how to boil pine needles into a bitter tea that chased off fever. She told him a little more, just enough. Said she left behind a bad situation, that she'd been blamed for something she hadn't meant to do. Caleb didn't push her to explain further. Still, secrets hung between them like smoke. Caleb kept a journal he never let her read. Every night, he wrote in it for long minutes, brow furrowed, lips pressed tight. She once caught sight of a line. If I'd reach him sooner, he might still be alive. She guessed it was about his brother. She wanted to ask, but didn't. Everyone carried ghosts. Some needed to stay quiet. Then, one morning, a man rode up to the cabin. Rosie watched from the window as Caleb stepped outside to meet him. They talked low, fast. The man wore a brown duster and had the look of someone who'd slept in a jail more than a few times. His horse looked half-starved. When he left, Caleb came back inside, looking like he hadn't blinked in an hour. Rosie stood. Who was that? An old friend, or something like it. What did he want? Caleb hesitated. Said he saw Travers in Missoula 2 days ago, asking for a woman who'd gone missing after a death at a church. Rosie's knees almost gave out. Caleb moved toward her, hands out but not touching. You're safe here. I mean that. No, she whispered. No one's safe. She stepped back, heart pounding. What are you not telling me? She asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. Then, the preacher you mentioned. Hatch, I knew him. Rosie stared. My brother worked for him. Trusted him. His voice went cold. Until the day he was found hanging from a barn beam. No note. No warning. Just a broken neck and a shut case. Rosie couldn't breathe. I think Hatch had something to do with it. But no one would listen. And now, he looked at her. Now you show up, running from Hatch's shadow. That's not a coincidence. Rosie felt the room shift. Everything tilt. So what does that mean? She whispered. Caleb didn't answer. Just watched her with eyes that finally saw too much. They weren't just two people hiding from the past anymore. They were standing in the middle of it. And the truth, whatever it was catching up fast. The next few days passed like a fuse burning short. The snow thawed just enough to turn the ground soft and messy, exposing old tracks and leaving nowhere to hide. Rosie felt it in her chest, tightness like the world was closing in again. Caleb grew quiet, more than usual. He still handed her coffee in the morning and mended the snare lines in the evening, but something was off. His words came slower. His glances lingered too long. She found herself looking over her shoulder, even inside the cabin. Trust had been growing between them, slow and steady like spring melt, but now it felt fragile, like it might shatter if she said the wrong thing. Then it did. One morning, she stepped out to gather kindling. When she came back, the cabin door was open. She paused. Caleb was still out hunting. Quietly, she stepped inside and saw the journal. It was lying on the table, open, not where he usually kept it, not even near the bed, like it was meant to be found. Rosie told herself to walk away, that reading it was a line she shouldn't cross. But her hands moved on their own. The entry was dated 3 weeks earlier, before he met her. If she's tied a hatch, she might be the thread I need. I don't want to use her, but I can't let this go. My brother's death wasn't suicide, and Hatch didn't act alone. The words felt like ice slicing through her. Use her. The front door creaked. Caleb stepped in, saw the journal in her hands, and froze. For a long second, neither of them said anything. You were going to use me, she said, voice brittle. I didn't know who you were then, he replied. I didn't know anything, just that you ran from something tied to Hatch. I was trying to find a way in. So you thought I'd be your way in? She asked, stepping back. You brought me here, fed me, protected me, just so I'd lead you to something. No, he said sharply. That's how it started. But it changed. Her hands trembled. Changed? He walked closer, slow. I didn't expect to care, Rosie. I didn't expect to see what this cost you. She shook her head, couldn't find her breath. You should have told me. I wanted to. I didn't know how. She dropped the journal on the floor. You sound just like Hatch. Caleb flinched. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat near the fire, the coat he gave her wrapped tight, but no warmth in it anymore. She thought of the Reverend's face, twisted in anger, how his hand gripped her wrist, and how fast everything had happened, how one push changed everything. She thought she could outrun it. But maybe this was the cost, being alone even when someone's sitting right beside you. The next morning, she was gone. She left before sunup, took Caleb's mare, and rode east toward the ridge, toward the place she once swore she'd never see again. If Hatch was still dead, his reach wasn't. Someone like Travers didn't chase women unless there was power behind it. Rosie realized she couldn't live like this, waiting for the knock, for the boots outside her window. She needed answers. She needed to know who sent him. It took a day and a half to reach the edge of the next town. Her face was windburned, her ribs ached, and she hadn't eaten since she left. She stabled the mare behind a crooked saloon, then pulled her hat low and stepped inside. The place smelled like whiskey and dust, but her eyes landed on the man she was looking for almost right away. Travers sat near the back, playing card with a few locals. He hadn't changed, still had that lazy grin, that calm, smug way of sitting like he owned the room. Rosie walked straight to him. He looked up, blinked, then smiled wide. Well, thought you made me work harder. Who sent you? She asked. He leaned back. No hug. No how have you been? She didn't move. He chuckled. You always were sharp. All right, fine. Man by the name of Elias Pratt. Says you stole something from his brother. Rosie's stomach dropped. Hatch didn't have a brother. Not blood. Business. The kind of brotherhood made in handshakes and buried ledgers. Pratt. The name meant something. She'd seen it before, on church paperwork, on donation slips, on deeds. Hatch didn't just run sermons. He ran money. Land, too. And now that Hatch was dead, someone else wanted to clean up the loose ends. Rosie turned to go. Travers caught her wrist. She didn't think. She grabbed his knife from his belt, slammed the butt into his jaw, and ran. Outside, she hit the street running. But she didn't get far. 3 men stepped in her path. Not law. Worse, guns for hire. She reached for the knife, but a blow caught her in the ribs and dropped her to her knees. The last thing she saw before her vision blurred was a pair of dark boots stopping in front of her. And then a shot. Not at her. At them. Another shot. Then yelling. Arms grabbed her. She kicked until a voice said, "Rosie, it's me, Caleb." He lifted her like she weighed nothing and carried her to the alley. Gunfire cracked behind them. She didn't remember much of the ride. Just pain, cold, the sound of hoofbeats. When she came to, she was back in the cabin. Ruth was there too, pressing cloths to her bruises. Caleb sat nearby, eyes hollow. "You shouldn't have come after me," she said weakly. He didn't answer. Ruth did. He never stopped looking. In the following days, truth spilled out like rain on a tin roof. Sharp, loud, unavoidable. Caleb told her the rest. His brother, Micah, had worked under Hatch as a property man, moving money, collecting debts. But Micah found out Hatch was laundering funds for Pratt and others, using church land for illegal trade routes. Micah had proof, and then he ended up dead. The sheriff said suicide. Caleb never believed it. When Rosie killed Hatch, she disrupted the power line. Now Pratt was tying off every frayed thread, including her. Rosie sat by the fire that night, staring at the flame. "I didn't mean to kill him," she whispered. Caleb knelt beside her. "But you did." She nodded. "And I'd do it again." He reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. "I'm done running," she said. "We take this to someone. Someone not in Pratt's pocket." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "You think that someone exists?" "Maybe not. But I'd rather die fighting than be hunted for the rest of my life." The stakes had changed. This wasn't just about Rosie anymore, or Caleb's brother. This was about the rot that lived under every clean white chapel and every polished boot in town. The three of them made a plan. Ruth still had contacts, people who owed her. Caleb had the journal, with notes Micah had passed on before he died. Rosie remembered names, dates, amounts. Together, they could make noise. Enough noise to wake the right kind of trouble. Or the truth. Whichever came first. The snow had started melting in long, wet sheets, peeling back the frozen skin of the land and leaving behind nothing but mud and bone. The thaw came fast, too fast. It felt like the ground itself was trying to shake loose everything hidden under it. And Rosie knew, deep down, they were out of time. The plan they'd stitched together, bring proof to someone outside the circle, raise hell if they had to, was already fraying before it began. It started with Ruth. She'd gone south 2 days earlier to meet someone, a former lawman in Butte who still had enough backbone to care, or so she said. He had a reputation for pulling at strings no one else would touch. Rosie watched Ruth ride off with her head high and her mouth set like stone. She'd trusted her. Wanted to, needed to. But 2 days turned into 3, then 4. On the 5th, a rider came instead. He was young, couldn't be older than 19, with a long scar across his cheek and boots too big for his legs. Said he was bringing a message from Ruth. But when Rosie opened the note, her blood went cold. There was no message, just a folded piece of paper with a single name, Caleb Ross. Nothing else. Caleb read it, face unreadable. Rosie stared at him. "What does that mean?" He said nothing. "Caleb," she repeated louder. Finally, he looked at her. "I think Ruth sold us out." The idea hit hard. Not because it shocked Rosie, but because it made sense. Too much sense. Ruth had seen everything. She knew the names, the plan, the routes. She knew about the journal, about Micah, about Rosie's part in Hatch's death. She hadn't just ridden south to help. She'd taken their story and all its leverage with her. Rosie felt the betrayal settle in her gut like poison. "We trusted her," she whispered. "She never promised loyalty," Caleb said. "Only help. But she sat beside me. She bandaged me. She might have believed it. For a while. But belief isn't enough when someone makes the right offer." Rosie stood, pushed past him. She couldn't sit still. Couldn't breathe. The air in the cabin had turned sharp. "What we do now?" she asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. We finally spoke. It was low cold. We end it. We go straight to Pratt. Rosie turned. That's suicide. We tell him we know everything. That we have proof. That if anything happens to us, the ledger goes public. We don't even know where Ruth took it. Or if he believes she has it. She's greedy. She'll want to use it. That gives us a window. Rosie looked at him hard. And if we're wrong? Caleb met her eyes. Then we don't come back. The next day, they left the cabin. Left it behind like a burnt-out shell. They rode in silence through the narrow pass. Past the tree where Caleb once hung rabbit skins to dry. Past the stream where Rosie had first fallen. The land looked different now. Sharper. They reached Cold Rock, Pratt's town, by sundown. It was clean, quiet, and full of watching eyes. Caleb knew where Pratt would be. Everyone did. The church. It looked the same as Hatch's, tall, white, with perfect glass windows and a bell that never seemed to ring. It made Rosie sick just looking at it. They went straight in. Pratt waited at the altar like a snake wearing Sunday best. He was older than she expected, thinner, but something in his face looked practiced, like he'd never had to raise his voice a day in his life. That kind of power didn't come from muscles. It came from silence, from money, from fear. Well, he said smoothly, you've been a thorn. Caleb stepped forward. We know about the land laundering, the donations, the routes through church property. We have names, figures, locations. Pratt didn't flinch. You have nothing but rumors and grief. We have Micah's journal. That made him pause, just for a second. Then he smiled. You mean the one Ruth delivered yesterday? Rosie's stomach flipped. Pratt leaned forward. She brought it like a gift. You were always the weakest link, Ross. Grief makes a man stupid. Caleb didn't speak. His jaw clenched, his fingers curled. Rosie could feel it unraveling, everything. I didn't want blood, Pratt continued. But if you force my hand, Rosie stepped in. You're a coward, she said, voice shaking. You hide behind pulpits and paychecks. You twist God's name to cover rot. Pratt's smile faded. She pressed on. But you forgot something. Ruth may be given you the journal, but she doesn't know what Micah told Caleb. Not everything. Pratt tilted his head. You're bluffing. Maybe, Rosie said. Maybe not. But if we don't walk out of here, someone will find out anyway. Silence stretched. Then Pratt nodded. To someone behind them. The shot came fast. Rosie flinched. But it wasn't meant for her. Caleb stumbled back, shoulder bleeding. She screamed. Lunged forward. Another gun cocked. But this time it was hers. She didn't remember pulling it. She just knew it was in her hand, pointed straight at Pratt. Let's go, she said. I swear to God, I'll make sure every paper between here and Helena prints your name beside Hatch's. Pratt narrowed his eyes. You think people care? They don't have to care, she whispered. They just have to know. Pratt waved his hand. The man with the rifle stepped back. Rosie grabbed Caleb, dragging him out the aisle. They backed out slow, out the church doors, onto the street. She didn't lower the gun until they were on the horses. They rode. Caleb was bleeding bad. She bound it tight with cloth torn from her shirt, but he was pale by the time they reached the edge of town. They camped near a creek that night. Rosie didn't sleep. The fire crackled low. Caleb lay beside it, fevered, mumbling Micah's name. Rosie watched the stars above. She had crossed the line, gun drawn in a church, threats spilling from her mouth like curses. She wasn't the girl who curled by a frozen stream anymore. She wasn't just a victim. She made choices now, dark ones, and she wasn't sure who that made her. Morning came cold and bright. Caleb stirred, coughed. We made it. Rosie nodded. We made it. But everything was different. They had no journal, no proof, no more allies, just each other. And that might not be enough. The sun rose hard and bright over the plains, casting long shadows that didn't feel honest. Nothing felt honest anymore. Not the land, not the silence, not the trembling hands Rosie used to wring out a cloth soaked in Caleb's blood. His wound wasn't healing right. She'd done what she could, wrapped it, cleaned it, but infection crept in, slow and sure. His fever came and went, dragging whispers out of him. Names, memories, regrets. He didn't know where he was anymore, but she did. They were just 2 hours west of where Hatch used to hold revival meetings, where Rosie had first arrived in a borrowed wagon, wearing a dress too thin for mountain weather and a heart too desperate to see clearly. Now that heart beat differently. Not softer, just changed. That morning, while Caleb slept in fitful bursts, Rosie sat by the fire and stared into it, thinking about choices, about what it meant to keep surviving. She had nothing left to lose, no name that mattered, no home, no safety. But maybe there was still something she could give. It was nearly noon when she heard hooves in the distance. Slow, careful, like someone didn't want to be heard but knew they'd been seen anyway. She reached for her rifle. One rider. Alone. She waited behind a tree, breath shallow. The horse stopped, and Ruth dismounted. Rosie didn't move. "I know you're there," Ruth called out. "You always were better at hiding than speaking." Rosie stepped out, gun still raised. Ruth looked thinner, hollowed out. She didn't wear her usual coat, just a shawl and a tired face. "I came alone," she said. "No guns, no deals. You sold us out," Rosie said. "I bought you time," Ruth snapped back. "You think I handed that journal over for money? I gave them just enough to make them hesitate, just enough to scare them." Rosie didn't lower the rifle. "You still chose them. I chose you. You think I don't know what happens to women like us in towns like that? I didn't sell you out, Rosie. I made sure you'd live long enough to decide what comes next." Rosie's hand shook. "And what exactly comes next?" Ruth took a deep breath. "A man came to see me 2 nights ago. Not one of Pratt's. Someone else. Said he had papers. Proof Micah sent copies, ledgers, letters, everything to a friend in the postal camp up north. Said he's tired of pretending this land isn't bleeding." Rosie stared. "Why would he trust you?" "Because I was Micah's friend too," Ruth said. Her voice broke for the first time. "Because he made me promise if anything ever happened to him, I'd keep his truth alive. I just didn't know how to do that without burying the both of you." Rosie lowered the gun. Slowly. "You didn't trust me," she whispered. "I didn't trust myself," Ruth admitted. "I've lived too long knowing when to shut my mouth, or to keep things tidy. But tidy won't save you now." Rosie looked past her, toward the tent where Caleb lay. "He's dying." Ruth's voice softened. "Then you better decide how you want this to end." That night, they rode together. North, toward the camp. Ruth knew the way. Rosie stayed close, one hand on the reins, the other wrapped around Caleb as he slumped behind her. By the time they arrived, his skin was clammy. His words didn't make sense anymore. But he was breathing. The camp was bigger than she'd expected. A mix of wagons and canvas shelters, miners and traders, a few postal clerks too drunk to walk straight. But tucked near the edge was a small tent with a dark red cross pinned to the front. Inside, a doctor worked by lantern light. Rosie didn't ask questions. She just carried Caleb in and begged. The doctor cut away the dressing and didn't say much, just set to work. Rosie waited outside, knees in the dirt, head down. Ruth sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Ruth said, "He'll live. If the fever breaks." Rosie nodded. "He loves you, you know." Rosie didn't answer. "You love him?" Ruth asked. Rosie wiped at her face. "I don't know what I am anymore." "That's not the same thing." Rosie looked at her. "I think part of me died when I pushed Hatch down those steps. Or maybe it was already gone. Maybe I never had a choice." Ruth's eyes were kind. "You always have a choice, even when the world lies to you." That night, the man Ruth mentioned arrived. He wasn't tall, didn't look like much. Just a brown coat, dark eyes, and a bag full of folded papers. He introduced himself only as Merrick. He sat with Rosie and Ruth by the fire and showed them what Micah had sent: bank logs, private correspondence between Pratt and Hatch, forged deeds, and land trades. More than enough to ruin them. "I've been holding on to this," Merrick said, "waiting for someone who'd be stupid enough to run with it." Rosie looked at him. "Why now?" "Because it matters," he said simply. "And because I'm tired." The next day, they sent 3 copies. One to Helena, one to Press in Butte, and one to a marshal's office 3 counties over. They didn't wait to see what happened. But word spread fast. 3 nights later, fires started in Cold Rock. Pratt's church burned. No one claimed it, but no one mourned it either. Men rode out of town, some angry, some afraid. A few disappeared altogether. Rosie watched it all from a ridge above the valley and knew something inside her had shifted again. But the story didn't end there, because truth, once let loose, takes on a life of its own. And revenge doesn't always ask for permission. Rosie returned to the camp to find Caleb awake, sitting up, pale but alive. He looked at her, really looked. "You stayed." She walked to him, knelt. "I ran from everything, but not you." He took her hand. "Then let's stop running." Rosie didn't answer, just leaned her head against his chest. She still didn't know what kind of life waited for them, but she knew what it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be silent or small. It wouldn't be built on fear. She'd paid the price, crossed every line, and in the end, she didn't find peace. But she found him, and maybe for now that was enough. Spring came late that year, slow and muddy, like the land itself wasn't sure whether it deserved warmth again. The snows melted in streaks across the hills, pulling up the dead things buried just below the surface. Animal bones, rotted fence posts, rusted tools left behind in the rush of loss. But something still bloomed. The creek Rosie once curled beside had thawed. She stood there now, watching the current roll past, her boots sunk deep in wet moss, hands folded in front of her. A different woman stood in her skin now, one made of scar tissue and memory. News had traveled fast. By now, most of Montana knew about the ledgers, about the way Hatch and Pratt had funneled land, money, and power through the shell of church law, about the fake baptisms that masked backdoor dealings, about the donations that turned into claims on Comanche land. Hatch was gone. Pratt had vanished in the smoke. Some said he fled north. Others swore they saw him hang behind his own church, his boots swinging like wind chimes. Rosie didn't know which story was true. She didn't care. Either way, his chapter was closed. But for others, the ink was still wet. Ruth stayed in the north, working in the postal camp, quiet as ever, but no longer pretending to be innocent. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't demand grace. But she didn't run either. She stayed and faced what she'd done, helped where she could, delivered mail, tended the sick, carried water in the dark. In time, people stopped whispering. Sometimes redemption wasn't a dramatic confession. It was just showing up every day, even when no one clapped for you. Caleb got stronger. His shoulder healed, though not right. He couldn't raise his arm all the way anymore, and some mornings he woke with a stiffness that made him wince. But he lived, and with each week that passed, he softened again. Not into the man he was before Micah died. Some parts don't grow back, but into someone steadier, less carved by grief. He spoke more, laughed sometimes. He didn't preach anymore. Said too many things in that old book had been used like a hammer instead of shelter. Still, he carried a copy in his bag. Not for others, just for himself, just in case. He and Rosie stayed on the edge of the mining camp, in a small lean-to they built together near the pines. It wasn't much. A stove, a cot, and a stream they could drink from. But it was quiet and safe. Caleb carved furniture when his arm let him. Rosie gathered herbs and boiled them into medicine. She helped in the birthing tent sometimes, when the midwife was overwhelmed. She still had blood on her hands, sure, but now, some of it came from helping new life enter the world. That had to mean something. The journal, the original one, Micah's, was never found again. Rosie sometimes wondered if Pratt destroyed it in the fire, or if Ruth had lied about handing it over in the first place. Merrick believed it was buried somewhere in Cold Rock, beneath the old church's floorboards. But no one went back to check. That town had collapsed in on itself like wet ash. Its buildings rotted in place, hollowed out by truth. Nothing grew there anymore. Justice didn't come wrapped in a trial or a headline. It came in pieces. A boy once beaten by Hatch now ran a shelter for other orphans. A widow who'd lost her land under a fake deed had it restored by a judge who finally listened. Some men got hanged. Others disappeared, but most were ruined in smaller, slower ways. No one trusted them. No one hired them. They drifted, broken, like leaves after frost. Rosie didn't pretend that made things right. Nothing could give back the years, or the bodies, or the ache in her chest when she thought about the baby that never cried, or the way the snow fell against her skin that night in the canyon. But she didn't want perfection. She wanted peace. And she earned it, inch by inch. Some nights, she and Caleb would sit beside the fire and read to each other. Old letters Micah had written, scraps of sermons, a story about two wolves in a snowy field. Caleb had a habit of falling asleep before the last page. Rosie never minded. She liked hearing the words out loud, even if only the trees listened. One evening, Ruth visited. She brought bread and a new pair of boots for Caleb, sat on the stump beside Rosie, and said, "You ever think about leaving this place?" Rosie smiled. "I left once. It didn't go well." "I don't mean running," Ruth said. "I mean starting." Rosie looked out over the pines. "I think this is starting." Ruth nodded, then pulled something from her coat. "A letter. Sealed. From Merrick. Says he's got an offer. A man in Helena wants to publish your story." Rosie didn't reach for it, just stared at the envelope like it might burn her fingers. "What story?" "Your story," Ruth said quietly. "The one where you didn't die. The one where you made them listen." Rosie shook her head. "It's not a hero's tale." "No," Ruth agreed. "But it's true." They didn't speak much after that. Ruth stayed the night, then rode off before sunrise, leaving only the letter behind. Rosie didn't open it. Not yet. Some truths needed to rest a while before being spoken again. Weeks passed. The wildflowers bloomed. Caleb found an old harmonica and tried to play it. He was terrible. Rosie laughed every time. One afternoon, they sat beneath a cottonwood tree and watched the clouds roll by. Caleb turned to her, sun in his eyes, and asked if none of it had happened. "Hatch, Micah, the baby, what do you think we'd be?" Rosie thought for a long time, then said, "Probably nothing. Just two strangers who passed each other once." "You regret it?" She shook her head. It hurt, but it mattered. That night, after Caleb had gone to sleep, Rosie lit a lantern and pulled out the letter. She didn't read it, just stared at the seal, feeling its weight in her hand. Then she folded it back up and tucked it away. Some stories are meant to be told. Others are meant to be carried. She rose, stepped out into the dark, and walked down to the stream. The same stream where she'd once curled up and waited to die. The same one where Caleb had given her his coat and whispered, "You're safe." The water moved on without her, as rivers do. But she knelt beside it, touched the surface, and whispered back something she'd never said aloud. "Thank you." And then, with no one to hear it but the wind and the trees, she smiled. Because in the end, the truth hadn't saved her. She had saved herself. And maybe that was the most honest ending there was.